Some breaking news coming in this hour. The Supreme Court of India has now said it will review the constitutional validity of Section 377, which makes it illegal to be homosexual in India. A three-member bench, which will be headed by the Chief Justice of India, will examine the validity of Section 377. The Supreme Court's comments come after listening to a plea filed by a member of the LGBTQ community seeking to declare Section 377 as unconstitutional. India's Supreme Court has also issued a notice to the central government asking it to respond to a writ petition in regards to Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which criminalizes homosexuality.
377 should have no place in the constitution of a democratic country like India, and we want it to be struck down. The CPM has always been against the criminalization of same-sex relations, and therefore the Supreme Court, we hope, will bring justice to citizens of India.
All right, let's go straight to WION's correspondent Jessica Taneja joining us now with the very latest. Jessica, certainly a huge development when it comes to India's top court willing to reconsider LGBT laws. How significant is this, and what can we expect?
Well, actually, this is going to be really significant because if you recall, even last year when the Apex Court had given out a judgment on right to privacy, it had reinstated the fact that personal choice of sexual orientation perhaps is in fact important to an individual. That's one right that can't be taken away. So of course, that falls in the gamut of also, right to privacy. But importantly, as you already pointed out, it's going to be a huge change for a country like India, where activists, even who've been fighting for the cause of LGBT community, will now finally get what they want. Remember, in 2014, it was scrapped off; it was declared unconstitutional. But that judgment is being revisited. Actually, it's important to point out it might be revisited also because of the observations made in the judgment for right to privacy, where Justice Chandrachud had outrightly stated that a personal choice of sexual orientation or the person you want to be with should not be taken away. But, advocates, senior advocates Kapil Sibal and Amrit Datar have already submitted that petitioners' right to sexuality, sexual autonomy, choice of sexual partner, life, privacy, dignity and equality, along with other fundamental rights which are guaranteed to every individual under the Constitution of India, needs to be granted. So why should the LGBT community be left out? So I guess this will be a fresh change in terms of bringing in legal provisions or changing the very set of a clause that criminalizes same-sex marriage.
All right, Jessica, stand by. We have more guests and panelists joining us now on this developing story. Let's now go straight to Mumbai, where we're joined by LGBT activist Paula Patton, getting us perspective on this. How significant could this be for India if the Supreme Court does, in fact, decide to change its views when it comes to decriminalizing homosexuality?
So I feel Section 377 ends up becoming the primary hurdle for achievement of all the rights which right now your spokesperson was speaking about, because we have really not gotten to really speaking about marriage equality and the other discriminatory acts which are there within the country, and we have been asking for 377 to go. So in that perspective, it's extremely important, but we also need to realize that there has been just too much of flip-flop on this. Some days there are good judgments, some days there are bad judgments. Congress supported us on their way out. The BJP in their party manifesto at the time of elections were against the whole 377, reading down. And we are back to, 1 year prior to elections, and we are now talking about reading down. So we just, as a community, we just feel that the flip-flops have been too many, and there needs to be some definitive action on this. And I hope they finally come up with a clear, decision from the Supreme Court.
All right, let's also bring in our political editor, Kartikeya Sharma, joining us now from the international desk. Kartikeya, certainly interesting development and interesting timing as well. In fact, last year, many countries approved same-sex marriage, including Australia. Several countries around the world have also followed suit in the past few years, including Ireland, Canada, and the United States. How significant could this be for Asia, for an Asian country, if this goes ahead and gets the green light?
It's very, very significant. You see, if you look at the landscape of the Islamic countries or where Islamic laws are there, or countries with primarily Muslim majorities, homosexuality is an issue. For example, you have archaic laws in places like Afghanistan and archaic laws in places like Iran and Pakistan, where, or for example, the sort of violence, Archit, everyone saw when ISIS was in power. People were being thrown off the buildings because they were homosexuals. Now, problem with India is that you have views on homosexuality which does not accrue from the book, because Hinduism does not have a book. But customary practices of the majority religion here has its own position of this. Now, many people feel that the time has come that the issue of homosexuality should be dealt straight away. It should become a matter of choice, an individual right, not a view of a community over what should be an individual position or right on his own sexual personal life. Now, on this, I think, judiciary was not able to take a progressive stand. I'm very happy that the senior judiciary or the Supreme Court has again taken a position to revisit the matter, because we have to understand that, in many countries like us, the issue, if you are married to Western democracy or modernity, then it is about certain rights which have to do with an individual, like children, age, gender. It is, all the issues cannot be tied together with religion or community perspective of a problem. They should be considered, but that's all. It should end with an individual right.
All right, let's bring in Mohammed Saleh joining us from the newsroom as well with the very latest. In India, Saleh, let me ask you, when it comes to dealing with a topic, whether it's sexual orientation, certainly very tabooed in the culture, why do you think this is getting prominence perhaps at this hour, perhaps now, by the top court?
Absolutely, indeed, Archit. One of the big issues when you talk of LGBT rights or same-sex marriage is the stigma that is associated with it in the society. As you correctly pointed out, India perhaps has been a little late in waking up to the fact that, something progressive needs to be done as to why should it be any affair of the state, as to what two individuals who are adults, who are mature, what they do inside a bedroom should not be the affair of the state. Now, let's actually put this entirely in perspective, because around the world you have about 76 countries in which having a same-sex relationship or a same-sex marriage is punishable by either death or life imprisonment. Now, that is the gravity of the kind of punishment that is given for any individuals who may not be what society believes or expects an individual to be, and that is, to have a heterosexual relationship. And also, there are about 26 countries which have now legalized same-sex marriage. The first country to have legalized same-sex marriage anywhere in the world was Netherlands, which started it off in the year 2000. We also saw recently several countries, including Australia, and even in the case of the United States, let's bring in what many people consider the most progressive country in the world, which in fact legalized same-sex marriage only after a Supreme Court ruling in the year 2015. So, and if you look at the kind of stigma that is associated with it, it's essentially your religious mores which are being imposed upon people in many of the democratic societies that claim themselves to be secular. And also, there was another interesting point. We stuck with Section 377. This, of course, is a section that was introduced during the British era, and we still live with it, while Britain, for its part, has now scrapped a similar law in their own country. And if you look at the world map, predominantly, in the Americas, you have a lot of countries in North and South America which have now legalized same-sex marriage. But when it comes to countries in, let's say, Africa, in Asia, many of them still lag behind. So there is a necessity that dialogue takes place. And the Indian Supreme Court, which has said that it will now revisit Section 377, actually comes up with a progressive law that takes into account the individual choices that every individual should be allowed to make.
All right, Saleh, stand by. Let's also bring an LGBT activist. We have Bindu Madhavi joining us live now from Pune with regards to this. What is the chatter with the LGBT community over the past few years, seeing so many countries, in fact, just last year, Australia, Austria, Germany and Malta legalized gay marriage in those parts of the world. Many countries have followed suit, but what's the chatter with the LGBT community about what India needs to do to be progressive?
What we need to understand is that in 2013, soon after the Supreme Court of India turned down the verdict given by the High Court, declaring 377 as unconstitutional, we had a landmark judgment, Nalsa versus Union of India, which gave recognition to transgenders. we need to understand that at that time, although that judgment gave economic rights and socio-economic rights to transgenders, it unfortunately fell short in the sense that it did not talk about reproductive and sexual rights of transgenders. So that was an issue whereby we have been given, the transgenders have been given a recognition as a separate community without giving them any reproductive rights, because 377 was an issue. But so we had referred this case to as a curative petition. But the good development that happened about 8 months ago was that when in another case called for Aadhaar card, there was a 9-bench Supreme Court bench which had to decide whether right of privacy is a fundamental right because it is not explicitly enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Happily, a unanimous judgment from the Supreme Court has come that it is right of privacy is a fundamental right, and this is going to have a huge bearing on the final hearing of 377. So I'm very happy now that the Supreme Court has referred this case to a larger bench. This Aadhaar card judgment will have a huge impact, and I'm very optimistic that this curative petition, in this curative petition, we will finally see justice.
Let me also ask you, Mr. Kir, with regards to this, the fact that so many countries around the world have legalized same-sex marriage, is that perhaps India trying to play catch-up to be more progressive in a global, perhaps, perspective when it comes to that? I mean, why now? This could have been done years ago. Why are we revisiting this at this point in time?
Right. One thing is that it is extremely unexpected and unfortunate that the Supreme Court reversed the High Court judgment, which was very liberal and progressive in nature. But what I would definitely say is that despite the fact that that was a regressive step when it was looking at LGBT rights, now that the Supreme Court has realized that maybe this needs to be undone, it's never too late, and we are still happy that even if it's a bit late, it's better late than never. So once we get out of this bottleneck, we have a lot of challenges like, as you said, same-sex marriage, adoption rights, etc. But better late than never, I guess.
All right, let's go back to our correspondents also standing by. We have Jessica Taneja, who covers the Supreme Court extensively. Jessica, this is something that perhaps could have been done years ago, could have been done much earlier, but again, resurfacing at this point. Same question to you. Is this perhaps India playing catch-up to some of its Western counterparts where same-sex marriage is legal in many parts of the world now, Australia, Ireland, the United States, to just name a few?
Well, actually, it's always the judiciary that takes a stand for the citizens, especially when it comes to India. You've seen the kind of judgments we saw last year, even if it's instant talaq or it's right to privacy. As the guest was also mentioning, the fact that right to privacy has a very important bearing on Section 377 curative petition being entertained again, because the judges made it evident that right to privacy is an intrinsic right now enshrined in the Constitution of India. So once a citizen has a right to privacy, the person has a right of entertaining or being with another individual. The consent for same-sex marriage also would come into place. An LGBT community will be able to live and legally be allowed to do so what they want to in particular. So, and the petitioners in fact say that, statute books say that it's in a free and independent India. Our Constitution gives us a guarantee of equality, fraternity, dignity of life, liberty. And actually, these will be read exactly why the right to privacy judgment came in. It's going to be read with that judgment and what kind of inferences were made. So, of course, it doesn't come as a surprise that now the curative petition is being entertained, because the Supreme Court will not go back on what is already written down in a historic judgment like right to privacy, where it has outrightly supported same-sex marriage, as well as given the right to an individual of any sexual orientation that person might have, disregarding, their personal choices. I mean, so this is exactly what the Apex Court has come up with. So they're given a legal, constitutional value. I think this will be a big boost for India in terms of culturally evolving and being able to live up to the ideas of the world where we're constantly orientalizing.
Right.
So that will, in fact, sort of have a lot of bearing.
All right, let's move on to Paula Patton joining us, an activist. Perhaps you could share some of the stories here the LGBT community faces in India and what this change could possibly bring in terms of some level of equality for those members of the LGBT community, because we typically don't see, it's a very taboo issue as we've addressed before. It's not something that is open, but has India made progress over the years, especially since when this was marred illegal by the Supreme Court? Has progress been made, or is there still a long way to go when it comes to equality and acceptance for the LGBT community here in India?
So let me put it this way. I actually feel that there has been great progress made within the LGBT community, because the way the community has mobilized and organized itself, you have Bindu there. Bindu does fantastic work in Pune. You have so much of other activities, and you have LGBT community members in the smaller towns. It's not restricted now anymore to Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore or whatever. You have groups of LGBT community members even in the smaller towns within the country, and the mobilization has been great. A lot of cultural as well as diversity which is coming into the whole picture, and I feel this is a community just waiting to release itself, but it's only the Section 377 that comes in the way of a lot of the other rights issues such as same-sex, marriage equality, inheritance laws, even in terms of healthcare access. All these seem to come in seem to be affected just because of Section 377. And if this gets lifted out, you have the potential of all those laws and all those changes coming into the play and improving the lives of LGBT community members. And I think that's why this becomes a very important step.
All right, let's go to our political editor. We have Kartikeya Sharma standing by at the international desk. Kartikeya, over the years, perhaps in pop culture and film, we've certainly seen more of those characters emerge, perhaps a little bit more attention towards LGBT representation on television, in movies. Is that a step in the right direction? I mean, the fact that these messages are being put out through the world of entertainment to perhaps provide acceptance and equality for the members of the LGBT, many of whom unfortunately have to live in isolation or in fear because it is illegal here in India.
See, there are a couple of things here. You see, if you have to understand the LGBT word, we use a lot of words which we interchange. For example, cross-dresser, transgender. But this is about criminalizing homosexuality. It ultimately boils down to that. Now, if you look at the way modernity has functioned past 150 years, there was a time in America in the 1980s, the Medical Association felt that the AIDS was a result of homosexuality. But with time, people, the medical fraternity and the society at large understood that these are individual choices which had existed historically. But then, if I may use the word Victorian prudishness in our criminal jurisprudence, or Victorian prudishness, under which our new post-colonial India was born and thrived, is something which we need to get rid of. And this revisiting the judgment is very, very important, because ultimately, at least I can say this for India, unlike other societies of countries like Saudi Arabia and other Islamic countries claim, right, where there's something has to do with the book. In India, it is not about a scriptural law or practice. These are communitarian views, but have to be understood and accommodated from an individualistic perspective.
All right, let's also bring in LGBT activist Bindu Madhavi as well, get perspective on this. In terms of the progress, I mean, at this point, suppose, the Supreme Court decides, well, how is that reaction, you think, going to be taken here in India? Are we going to see a lot of protests? Are we going to see people perhaps frustrated? Is it going to be more of a joyous occasion, or really a mixed bag? Where do you think this is going to develop in the days and months to come?
Well, I think the LGBT community has been looking for this day for a long time now, so there is a lot of excitement right now. And we are optimistic because some of the judges have explicitly stated in that Aadhaar judgment that looking at privacy being a fundamental right, 377 does not have much of a case, is not much of a case that can be, dealt with by the opposition, which means that we are very optimistic about the outcome. Yes, now the fringe elements and the homophobic elements are going to be upset about it, and I do expect them to do some protests. I do expect them to be very vociferous about the fact that they do not want 377 to be scrapped, but we are willing to fight it out. And because 377 is our biggest bottleneck, once that is removed, we can move on to same-sex partnership issues, which are very important for us, inheritance rights, transgender reproductive rights, all of this we have not been able to take up right now because of 377. Even when we look at multinational companies that are operating in India, since foreign employees who come here to work in India, especially in the IT field, they are also subjected to this law. So many multinational companies are also looking that 77 be scrapped so that domestic partnership privileges and other facilities that are provided by them to same-sex couples outside of India will also apply to those who come to India to work. So even the corporates are looking forward to 377 being scrapped. So, and I do think that by the time that is done.
All right, a quick recap again for those of you just joining in. The Supreme Court of India says it will review the constitutional validity of Section 377, which makes it illegal to be homosexual in India. A three-member bench, which will be headed by the Chief Justice of India, will examine the validity of Section 377. The Supreme Court's comments come after listening to a plea filed by a member of the LGBT community seeking to declare Section 377 as unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has also issued a notice to the central government to ask to respond to a writ petition of the Indian Penal Code criminalisation, which makes it illegal to be homosexual in India. Let's go straight to Mohammed Saleem, joining us now live from the newsroom with the very latest. We understand that members of the LGBT community have filed this petition, say they live in fear from police because of their sexual preferences. And you mentioned a short while ago that perhaps an outdated law, even the UK, which is now allowing same-sex couples to live freely, but perhaps not the case here in India, where many of them unfortunately have to live and hide in fear.
That's exactly correct, Archit. If you look at where Section 377 comes from, it is something that was made a part of the Indian Penal Code in the year 1861. And the section was in fact very loosely based on the Buggery Act of United Kingdom, which was actually made in the year 1533. So this is a very, very archaic sort of a rule. Initially, there were some steps that were taken. For instance, in 2009, the Delhi High Court had decriminalized homosexuality, but this was an order that was overturned by the Supreme Court in 2013. It's heartening, especially for the activists, that the plea has now been admitted by the Supreme Court. It now remains to be seen as to how the Supreme Court, of course, acts. Because remember, more than the law, the bigger challenge for the LGBT community and also for people who are perhaps not hetero in terms of their sexual orientation, the social stigma that is associated with being a homosexual, that needs to be overcome. So the next few weeks and months ahead will, of course, show us to, is India up to move ahead in accepting same-sex marriages, same-sex relationships? That, of course, needs to be seen.
And, in terms of some of the other countries as well recently that have, in fact, made it legal for same-sex marriage, Austria, Australia, Germany, Malta, certainly the United States, the UK, Ireland, many countries have taken that step. Perhaps is this India catching up? I mean, how do we view this and why now? Is this perhaps India trying to sort of make sure it is on the global scheme of things when it comes to being a more progressive state?
Indian society is an extremely diverse one. In 2009, when the Delhi High Court had decriminalized homosexuality, when it had struck down and said 377 is perhaps not, something in keeping with the rights of an individual, a lot of people thought that perhaps India is progressing. But that very judgment was set aside by the Supreme Court in the year 2013. And also, different governments have had different things to say about same-sex individuals having relationships and getting into a marriage. The UPA earlier had said that they support the fact that 377 should have been struck down. The present dispensation is perhaps not that much in favour of striking down Section 377. The Supreme Court has also asked the present government to come up with its views on what it feels needs to be done in this case. So India is playing a bit of a catch-up. There are about 26 countries. The most important one, the last big one, which decriminalized homosexuality via a vote in the parliament, was Australia. Even in the case of the United States, it was a Supreme Court ruling in 2015 which gave same-sex marriages and same-sex relationships some level of sanctity. But it now remains to be seen as to what happens in the case of India. Because remember, it is also about the law and it's also about the social mores. Because at this point of time, like Kartikeya was a little while back pointing about, it's not because of a religious sanction, not something that is written in a book, that homosexuality is something considered illegal or something which is considered to be, aside from the norm. Because if you look at Indian literature, there are references to same-sex couples, same-sex relationships, which are there for everyone to read. And somehow, post the British rule, we seem to be still hung up with that Victorian prudishness, which had criminalised same-sex relationships. And now it remains to be seen whether we'll be able to overcome this hangover of this Victorian prudishness, if one were to so put it.